Difficulty options are a staple in video games, but as a developer, you can take this concept much further to maximize the replayability of your games. Here are some ways that games build on the concept of difficulty options to keep the experience fresh for players across years and years. If you traveled back in time 20 years and told people the biggest tower defense game in the world is about monkeys popping balloons and is now on its 6th installment, they would not believe you. Bloons Tower Defense is a simple concept, but that's what makes it so approachable, and that's how its difficulty is able to scale so high. In Bloons Tower Defense, the balloons appear in waves and travel along a set path. You are able to place towers down along this path, and they will automatically attempt to pop the balloons using various attacks. If you let the balloons reach the end of the path, you lose lives. Run out of lives, and it's over. Popping balloons gives you money that you can use to recruit more towers, or to upgrade your existing towers to give them better attacks. On the surface level, it seems pretty simple to add difficulty options to this game. In easy mode, you have more money, more lives, and you don't have to survive as many waves. In hard mode, you have less money, less lives, and you have to survive more waves. This will keep players occupied for a little bit, but once they've played a few times, they'll discover the best strategies and the hard mode won't be so hard anymore. You could continue to make harder modes with the same formula like they did with Impoppable mode, where you only have one life and you have even less money, but you can see how eventually this type of progression reaches a plateau. To truly keep the game fresh, you need to force players to change the way they think about the game entirely. Bloons Tower Defense does this in several ways. Rather than just changing the numbers to determine the difficulty, they also have tons of different maps with their own difficulty ratings, and they've thought of a ton of fun ways to make the game harder with just the maps. How about shortening the path so there's less time to pop the balloons, adding multiple paths that the balloons can travel along instead of just one, limiting where players can place the towers, or adding walls to block towers' view of the path. Once players overcome the basic difficulty options, these environmental changes are much more interesting. Suddenly their optimal strategies won't work as well. In fact, I think some of these environmental changes are specifically meant to combat the most obvious strategies. For example, the sniper monkey is very useful since it has unlimited range, meaning it can be placed in a corner far away from the track to leave room for other stuff. The walls introduced in many maps in Bloons TD6 directly combat this strategy by forcing the player to think about where they put the sniper monkeys, lest their line of sight get blocked by an object on the map. The walls are a much more interesting tool to make the game harder than simply changing numbers. Bloons TD6 also employs the classic restrictive method of increasing difficulty, where you straight up don't allow the player to use certain things that might make the game easier. The towers are divided into something like classes based on their use case. Primary towers offer the most general benefits. Military towers are strong attackers with high damage output, but other limitations. Magic towers have unique abilities that require some more thought to use correctly, well, aside from the super monkey. And support towers aren't good attackers on their own, but they're good at assisting your other towers. In addition to the basic difficulties mentioned earlier, you can also play the maps while being restricted to only one class of towers, which offers another interesting challenge, since the classes of towers are most effective when playing off of each other. That's already a ton of ways Bloons Tower Defense offers a wide variety of difficulty options to the player, and I haven't even mentioned some of the other restrictive modes like deflation and CHIMPS, as well as odysseys and boss events. The Bloons Tower Defense games have been around for a long time, with even Bloons Tower Defense 5 releasing as far back as 2011, yet they still find ways to keep the game fresh. Geometry Dash was already considered a hard game when it came out in 2013, even being modeled after a game literally called the Impossible game. Nowadays, it has come so far that I don't think most people are even able to fathom how hard the hardest levels truly are. Geometry Dash has a much different but still effective way of offering a wide range of difficulty options. Every level in the game has a rating for how difficult it is, and players are expected to play through the levels in order, gradually improving their skills and understanding of the mechanics. The ratings tell the player how hard the level will be, and how much they're progressing as they beat harder and harder levels. The game's extremely deep level editor and community level browser maintains these same ratings, meaning players can transition from the base game's levels into community made levels at whatever skill level they happen to be at. If someone's struggling with Clutterfunk, an insane difficulty level, they can play some of the thousands upon thousands of levels made by other players which have been rated as harder, a step below insane, to refine their skills, or just to keep the game fresh without having to make that skill jump they might not be ready to make. Community-made levels go through a rating process by moderators to decide their true difficulty, and the most well-made levels are featured so that players don't have to do a ton of browsing to find good levels that fit their skill level. The daily level, weekly demon, and event levels are other hand-picked challenges that players can trust will be well-made, and they're given a reasonable incentive to try to beat them. For players that completed the base game but still want harder challenges, the community levels scale way higher in difficulty than the base game, and there's actually infrastructure to support this too. In the base game, demon is the highest difficulty, difficulty, but on the community side, it's split into easy, medium, hard, insane, and extreme, which makes progression more gradual and intuitive for players, and prevents them from biting off more than they can chew, especially because community-made demon levels vary greatly in difficulty despite technically being the same rating. Nowadays, even the extreme demon difficulty has scaled so much that players created the demon list, which ranks the difficulty of extreme demons and gives high-level players a roadmap to the absolute hardest levels in the game. Whatever someone's skill level is, they'll be able to find good levels that are the right difficulty for them. Now, the advanced level editor is definitely the biggest reason why Geometry Dash has stayed fresh for over a decade, but the structuring of the game's rating system and the intuitive design of the level browser are what allowed players to get so good at the game over the years. Geometry Dash basically let players come up with their own difficulty options, and then perfectly integrated them in with the rest of the game. Like Bloons Tower Defense and Geometry Dash, Terraria has also been around for over a decade and still managed to stay fresh. Difficulty options were not a feature initially, but over time the game has introduced new difficulties. Unlike the Bloons Tower Defense approach of just adding as many different challenges as possible, Terraria only has 4 difficulties, but they each have a lot more depth. Relative to Classic mode, Journey mode is the easier difficulty, with Expert and Master mode being harder difficulties. While Journey mode does decrease the stats of enemies to make the game easier, it's more than just a typical easy mode. It works more like a sandbox mode that lets you figure out how the game works in a more casual environment. You can control many features of the game, such as time, weather, spawn rates, and even giving yourself God mode. The researching feature reduces grinding by letting you get unlimited amounts of an item once you research it enough times. These features make the experience of playing Journey mode distinct from the other difficulties. Expert mode is more of a standard difficulty option than Journey mode, but still adds many features that are more interesting than the typical stat increases of a hard mode. Most notably, enemies and bosses gain new attacks that make them more complex than before. For example, bats inflict a debuff called Feral Bite, which causes various other debuffs to happen for a few seconds at a time, many of which are quite debilitating. Zombies sometimes carry arms, skeletons throw bones, jellyfish can become invulnerable, spiders shoot web balls, and so on. For the bosses, they typically gain a new phase or attack, which is much harder than any of their previous attacks, adding a new layer of difficulty to every fight. Unlike many other difficulty options in other games though, Terraria's Expert mode actually offers a lot of benefits to the player as an incentive to push through the new challenges. While many stats are decreased, some stats like defense are actually increased. Rare items are generally easier to come across, and bosses even drop Expert mode exclusive items, which are typically pretty game-changing. For example, beating King Slime in Expert mode gives the Royal Gel, which takes the most common enemy at this point in the game, the slime, and makes it friendly. These changes offer tangible rewards to the players who are willing to step up to the challenge of Expert mode, offering another incentive aside from just getting bored of the easier modes. Master mode builds on the ideas of Expert mode, offering special trophies for beating the bosses called relics, as well as special pets themed around every boss. The changes to Master mode aren't as significant as the other difficulties, but are enough to encourage people to try it if Expert mode is no longer a challenge to them. Since Terraria is a much more drawn-out game than the other games mentioned, the developers took the approach of making each difficulty have its own identity and enough depth to stay interesting for multiple playthroughs, rather than adding a ton of different modes. As a developer, the best way to keep players coming back to your game is to give them fresh ways to replay it. For many games, difficulty options are a way for the game to grow with the player as they get better at it. The idea of difficulty options can be expanded beyond just simple stat increases. Challenge modes can put constraints on the player to force them to think differently about how they play the game. A robust rating system can allow players to find the challenges that suit their skill level. Special rewards and exclusive items can encourage players to take the step toward overcoming an intimidating difficulty option. What are some games you've played that take a creative approach to difficulty options?